Hello, my name is Duchess Dale, and we're here today at the Chico New Thought Center for Spiritual Living to get the inside track on author Gregg Levoy. Mr. Levoy's first book was Callings, Finding and Following an Authentic Life, and he's here today to talk about his latest book, Vital Signs, The Nurture and the Nature of Passion. Hello and welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm very excited about this opportunity to talk about your new book.
Great, thank you, as am I.
Oh, good. So why don't we start with your personal definition of passion?
My personal definition is that it is about engagement. It is about spark, life force, vitality, mojo. It goes by a lot of names, but it's about feeling plugged in, feeling alive in whatever arena we're talking about, whether it's vocation or relationship or creativity, spirituality. And I don't mean to sound overly dramatic about it, but I also think of passion as essentially a survival mechanism. Because I think that our attachment to life depends on our interest in it. And in that sense, I really do think of it as a survival piece.
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense with the fact that I've noticed lately that there's a buzz, whether it's in the corporate world or in the world of spirituality, that passion has kind of taken the forefront. So it's your feeling that that's happening because it's our intrinsic nature to do that?
It is our intrinsic nature, and I've been interested in this too, how much talk there is in the last 5 or 10 years about this subject. Like you said, business people, they talk about employee engagement, and educators talk about being a lifelong learner, and couples talk about getting the spark back. And there's just a lot of talk. And the first thing that comes to my mind as to why there's so much dialogue recently about this subject is frankly the flip side of the fascination we have with zombies and vampires.
Oh, tell us more.
I mean it. I've done a little bit of research, and it turns out that there have been over 50,000 books written about those two subjects in the last 2 decades alone. 50,000 books, and over 500 movies and TV shows.
Wow.
And that's a lot of attention. And I think that partly what's going on there is not just there's some apocalyptic thinking involved in that, but I think another reason is we have sort of a collective fear of being drained of our life force and left in a catatonic state. And then there's the zombies and the vampires. And I don't think it's a coincidence that every culture seems to have a word for vampire. This is a creature or a force so needy that it sucks the life force out of others. And I think there's some collective anxiety around the culture that we've created, as wonderful and amazing as it can be, that can also be life-draining.
Got it. So bridging your two books, from Callings to Vital Signs, well, tell me how they work together. Or does one have to have a passion to follow a calling? Or do you have to have a calling to ignite passion?
Well, let me see. How I'm noticing myself languaging it, and because the book is so new, I'm just still finding out how I'm languaging the difference between the first book and the second. And I think of Callings as largely about finding a passion. I think of this book as more about living passionately. So I'm broadening the scope, and I'm looking at passion not just in the vocational arena, but in relationships, in service, in spirituality, in expressiveness, in adventure, in
the whole shebang.
It's really the skill of passion that I'm looking at.
I like that.
And I think of it as a skill. I think of it as a stance that we either take or don't take toward life, which can inform all of our activities in all arenas.
So tell me, can passion and purpose be at odds?
I think they can. I mean, in the sense that passion is it's a life force, it's an intensity, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's attached to a deeper sense of purpose or even service. In fact, I think that not all passions should be acted upon, partly for that reason. I think there's healthy passion, and I think there's unhealthy passion. And I think there's a difference also between being called and being driven. All right? So researchers talk about what they call harmonious passion. All right? So this is flexible persistence towards some activity or some goal, and being more in a flow state. And then there's what they call obsessive passion. And that is persistence at any cost.
Oh.
All right. And less of a flow state, more a sense of the passion being in control of you rather than the other way around. And that your sense of identity or your sense of self-esteem is all wrapped up in performance. So there are ways that I think that passion can kind of knock us off the rails and off of a sense of purpose.
Okay. So that would be the downside to passion.
That would be one of the downsides.
So you've written that people think passion is something fleeting or frivolous, so how do you reconcile the seesaw of the innate desire that we have for passion and the intrinsic desire for security?
Oh, yeah. I think of that as one of the primary dramas that people encounter, and just working through their sense of life force is there's passion and desire, and there's safety and security, and a desire to be in control of our lives. And I think one of the high arts of living the heroic life is kind of refereeing the tug of war between the two of them, because I think they're both important. I don't want to elevate passion over security and say that our desire for security is secondary and at all costs we should live passionate lives. I think we need both of them. And this is where I think the skill of paradox comes in. All right. I've heard it described as heroism redefined for the modern age, is the ability to hold the tension between two seemingly opposing energies like security and passion, or head and heart, or us and them, and still hang on to your cookies, just to hold the tension between them and bring them together to kind of educate one another, because we need them both.
So is that part of what you referenced about Joseph Campbell saying, you get the call and then it's the refusal of the call?
Well, yeah. I mean, in the sense that phase one of responding to passions, callings, purpose is often refusing it. I mean, according to Joseph Campbell's template, the refusal of the call is the natural, universal reaction to a calling. It's let this cup pass from me, or it's Bilbo Baggins, to go from the sublime to the absurd. Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit gets a knock on the door from the wizard Gandalf, who says, "I have an adventure for you." And his reaction, classic stage one stuff. He says, "Oh, no. We're just plain quiet country folk. We have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner." Classic, let this cup pass from me stuff. And if it's any consolation to people who are trying to re-engage with their sense of passion or purpose, that is absolutely part of it. I think of the movie The Right Stuff. Remember this movie?
Oh, sure.
About the Mercury astronaut program? Well, there's a scene in there where the pilot, Chuck Yeager, is trying to break the sound barrier for the first time in history. And just as his jet reaches that illustrious, famous Mach 1, which is like 700 miles an hour, the plane starts to shake really violently and just threaten to bust apart in midair, going at almost 700 miles an hour. And then at Mach 1, he breaks through the sound barrier. They hear a boom down on Earth. And then the plane goes into a perfectly smooth ride. I mean, he describes it in the book by saying, my grandmother could have been up there sipping lemonade. And I love this because I think in any attempt at a breakthrough, right, there's a Mach 1 experience. There's shaking and shuddering. So coming back to life after a sleep, all right, whether your creative energies are asleep or your passions for your partner are asleep or your desire for a career and a vocation have been put to sleep, coming back to life is often painful. And there's often shaking and shuddering that's part of doing that. And I just want to offer a generous tip of the hat to what it is, both of us in our respective kinds of works are encouraging people to do in coming back to life.
Well, and inherent in what you just said with the Mach 1 is the risk factor.
Yeah.
That between, starting with the call and maybe the refusal of the call or the security is that that was a life-threatening risk for Mr. Yeager.
Absolutely.
And it feels like that for those of us who are following
I think so.
passions.
Well, I think so. I mean, especially if you're looking at things like quitting a job, or even some people leaving a marriage that isn't working for them, or starting up a new enterprise, or any way of stepping beyond the comfort zone. not just your comfort zone, but other people's comfort zones.
Aha.
And people are not necessarily going to be nice about how they feel about you doing that. And this is something that everybody's got to contend with in following some of their passions, nurturing some of their passions, is what are other people going to say? How are other people going to respond? And to have the courage to continually say yes to your life when other people may be saying no. Yep.
In the Gospel of St. Thomas, Jesus, the guy you mentioned before, was quoted as saying, if you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you.
Yeah.
So that's what you're talking about between taking that risk, moving past the Mach 1.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And I think a lot of people already know the feeling of feeling like the living dead. I mean, maybe this is coming back to the vampire zombie theme, but I think there's a lot of ways that people experience the suppression of their natural exuberant selves. It's a job that sucks the life out of you, or it's a relationship where you feel like a ghost of your glorious self, or it's your eager mind being put in boring circumstances, or having life goals that you don't feel any passion for. You know what I'm saying? There's lots of ways that people experience this suppression. I'm thinking of Larry King. Okay?
All right.
Larry King was once asked, who makes a great guest for your show? All right? He says, you got to be funny, you got to be articulate, you got to be self-deprecating, and you have to have a chip on your shoulder. And this is fascinating to me because when I heard that, I reflected back to the time in my mid-30s when my mother told me that I had spent most of my childhood on Ritalin. Okay? Now, finding out that in my mid-30s that she had slipped it into my morning milk, as she put it, as you might imagine, was upsetting news.
I would think so.
Right? And so a friend of mine said to me, Greg, that probably explains both of your books. The search, callings, the search for an authentic life, vital signs, the nature and nurture of passion. So I have a chip on my shoulder about having my natural energy suppressed by other people, and all the ways that other people can look down their noses at us when we're not towing the line, we're not sitting still and keeping our tie straight and keeping your knees together and acting.
Focus and behave.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that it's not like I'm encouraging people to nurture their grudges, their chips on their shoulder, but I do want to acknowledge that they are a source of passion. Righteous action, for instance, often comes from that sense of having a chip on your shoulder. And properly focused, I'm not talking about splattering those kinds of passion around. I'm talking about focused and socially useful. That those energies are a tremendous source of passion in the world.
So with that, tell me about, and you mentioned it in the book, the whistleblowers from the unconscious. I love that phrase. So how do the whistleblowers or the daemons that we have, how do they show up and how do we pay attention to them?
Oh boy, marvelous question. The daemon is, frankly, the origin of demon. And it was originally a guardian spirit that everybody possessed. Okay, and this is the part. Some people would probably refer to it as soul. All right,
okay.
Or even spirit. It's the part of us that looks out for our greater unfoldment. All right, and lots of ways of paying attention to it. And its job description is to ensure our unfolding, the enlargement of ourselves and our souls and our love and our compassion and our gifts in the world, and lots of ways to tap into them. Dreams. Dreams are one of the primary ways that the gods and the goddesses have historically spoken to the mortals. All right?
Yes.
And the daemons, interestingly too, the Latin word for happiness is eudaimonia, which means a well-pleased daemon. And so those parts of ourselves, dreams and fantasies and intuitions, lots of ways that the daemonic energy informs us about what's right for us and what's right for the world as well.
So we need to pay attention to them as they blow their whistles and...
I think so. And this is a matter of turning the receivers on and being willing to hear what you hear. this is an acquired taste.
True. Well, many people think that they want to keep the passion alive, but is it not the nature of passion to fade? And if so, why do people typically lose their passions?
Yeah, it is in the nature, I think. I mean, it's in the nature of nature to fade. I mean, everything fades. This is the law of entropy. It tells us that systems tend to lose energy over time unless you put more energy into the system.
Okay.
So this is just the constant vigilance and diligence that it takes to keep our vitalities and our life spark alive is this kind of vigilance around staying awake and staying connected to who we are, having some kind of practice where we're in dialogue with the deep self, the parts of us that want to continually be awakened and reawakened, lit and relit, and it is the tendency of passions in again, all arenas to gradually fade away. And so it requires that we keep a fire under them, assuming, of course, that we want to stay feeling alive, because a lot of people place security above passion. And frankly, in the contest between the two of them, this has been my observation, as well as my experience, which is that security tends to win, and passion tends to get deep sixed.
So what do you recommend for revitalizing a passion, or what particular practices do you use to keep your passion lit?
Well, let me give you a small example that encapsulates my whole approach to this, which is tackle it at the mini level, the level of the gesture and the moment, not the extreme makeover, okay? I have, in the last year, noticed that I have a little downward pulling habit every day of my life that I've only recently begun to notice is draining my energy every single day. And what it is that in the transition zone between sleeping and waking up in the morning, okay, what generally gets me out of bed is not the alarm clock. It is a thought that goes through my head about something I've got to get done that day, something I was supposed to have gotten done yesterday or last week and didn't, or a looming deadline, or a voice in my head saying, I can't believe you're sleeping in again. But in other words, a negative thought. And only in the last year have I been catching this and realizing how incredibly often what gets me out of bed in the morning is a negative or worrisome thought. So what I've started experimenting with is a new approach. What I'm doing is I'm lying in bed. I'm refusing to get up on that note. I'm lying in bed until a more affirmative thought, a more positive thought crosses my mind, and only touching my feet to the ground on that thought. So in other words, an upswing rather than a downer. And I'm definitely noticing a difference, a shift in my energies throughout the day by starting that way. And that's the level that I'm encouraging people to identify, at the very least, where you lose energy, where it kind of drains out.
Okay, so that's that's a little sterno flame for the passions. What do we do to, with a bellows, what can we do to fan the flame, to keep it active?
Okay. I would say that would be things more like submitting yourself to a community of support. People who are going to keep your feet to the fire. All right? People who are going to keep you accountable. And I think it's important to build accountability into the proceedings. All right? In other words, certainly not to isolate yourself. It's easy to just try to figure this out all by yourself. And you alone are called, but it doesn't mean you got to do it all by yourself. And I think one of the bigger ways, the bellows, as you put it, it would be more like get other people involved so that the people are looking forward to hearing how the campaign is going, whatever the campaign is. And I believe that community plays a beautiful and vital role in the unfolding of an individual's life flame, and life path. And I think that joining with community to help us do that, to wake up, is critical.
Well, I like that. Thank you. It's job security for me.
There you go. Absolutely.
Well, speaking of centers or communities, there have been a lot of articles and things written about. The question has been, what would you tell your younger self if you had the opportunity? What would you tell your younger self, maybe before the 30s when you found out about the chemical?
Wow. What would I tell my younger
Any
self?
advice for your younger self?
I would say several things pop into my mind. One is it's something about it's going to be all right. It's going to be fine. You're fine. And in fact, you're better than fine. You're exquisite, and you're so worried about measuring up and meeting expectations. And you don't need to worry so much. The amount of energy that you are putting into worrying, even as a young boy, is way more than you're going to need to succeed at life. So that would be one thing. Another would be that make peace with the fact that there are always going to be forces of decay and distraction all the way along, in the form of self-doubts, in the form of other people's resistance, in the form of setbacks and failures, and resistance from within and without. Just know that there's always going to be, it's like force and counterforce, punch and counterpunch, and that this isn't something to bemoan, and lament. Doesn't mean you're failing, when you run into resistance. It means it's the path. It's the Mach 1 experience. I would say to my younger self, just know all throughout the journey that this is part of, it's like the Buddhists have something called, they call the mishap lineage. This is that mistakes are the path, right?
Yes.
And it's like, just know that quote, failure. I remember my dad, who's a scientist, once saying to me, he said, you'll be better off in life, generally speaking, if you don't think of life in terms of failures and successes. He says, think of it in terms of like a scientist. He said, think like a scientist. There's just results. And it takes some of the booga off of, am I succeeding? Am I failing? It's just, life is an experiment. You're testing out hypotheses and looking for results and just making course corrections based on it, rather than tearing your hair out and beating your chest every time you run into a wall. It's the path.
It's the path. I know you're a twin.
Yeah.
Is your brother as passionate as you are?
I would say he is.
Is he?
Different arenas, different skill sets, but this is definitely all three of the Levoy boys.
They got it. Did they get it? So it's somewhat of the Levoy DNA.
Oh, think? Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah. I think in the acknowledgments page of this book, I thank my father for the gift of wonder.
Oh.
And all three of us got that.
Oh, nice.
As did almost anybody probably who came in contact with my dad, because he was, he looked at life with the eyes of a scientist, and wonder and awe, which I think of as among the most important active ingredients in a passionate life, is whatever you do, do not lose the sense of wonder and awe. Refuse to be flattened and forget that life is amazing in a million billion ways, and that there's no loss of ways to be amazed at life. People, places, things, everything.
How wonderful to hear that. And especially, my experiences when you think scientists, I do not think of them as thinking as wonder and awe. I think of them as very linear and pragmatic and black and white. And so you've just opened up a whole new...
one of the most wonderful quotes I've ever run across, I think was, it might have been Ray Bradbury, right? He said, the most amazing statement in science is not eureka, it's, that's funny. So there's that sense of wondering, that leads on to research and discovery, and again, maybe something socially and culturally useful.
Love that. Well, I have something I'd like to do to get a little more of the inside track on you. And I wanted to ask you a few questions that were originally inspired by Bernard Pivot or Marcel Proust. Okay. And I'm just asking some of them. They have about 27 questions, but I won't. What is your favorite word?
Satisfaction. Because it means to be surrounded by fruit. And there's something about it that just rings my bells.
I'm digressing myself, but you have a way with words. You love words with such a passion. It's like eating espresso beans.
Yeah.
The way you do it. It's just...
Oh, I know.
So, well, then what's your least favorite word?
Maybe. Because it can rob decades from your life.
Oh, yes.
That infernal indecision that is represented by maybe.
Okay. And what turns you on creatively, spiritually, and or emotionally?
First thing that pops into my mind is the natural world. The sheer beauty and design of the natural world never ceases to move me. And I take myself out into it every chance I get.
And what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I would probably say being a reporter for National Geographic.
So you have your passion and your natural state in one.
Exactly.
Huh?
And also the cultural fascination. Getting to immerse myself in other cultures as well. There's something about that profession that's always been on my fantasy list.
Fantasy list. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, well, kind of like your fantasy list, but what books are you currently reading, or what's stacked on your nightstand?
One that I have yet to open. I'm waiting till tomorrow when I go on a 4-day retreat up at Stewart Mineral Springs. It's a book called Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. And he's a surgeon. So he's talking about what it really means to people to be mortal and to face their mortality, especially when they're ill. And so it's a physician's look at the struggle against mortality and the struggle to have to open up to it. And that I've heard a lot of people rave about the book. That's what's on my nightstand, and I'm looking forward to diving into it on retreat. Partly because I am a really, really big believer in the importance of having a mortality meditation as part of coming back to life. To whatever degree people, including myself, feel disconnected from living fully. There's something about regularly reminding yourself and gently reminding yourself that you have an expiration date. You know what I'm saying? And I say this because I think that of course death itself defeats us, but I think that the idea of death is extremely liberating, and in some very dramatic ways. And there's something about reminding ourselves that this is our time in the game, that can help us stay awake throughout the journey. So there's something about that subject, about mortality, that's fascinating to me.
Okay. And is there another favorite book? That's a new one.
Yeah.
Anything that's right there, always there for you?
The first one that comes to my mind is a book called Transitions by William Bridges. You know the book? And this is a book I've read 4 times at 4 transitions in my life, more dramatic transitions. And I mean, you got to love a book called Transitions written by a guy named Bridges. I mean, but yes. But the reason I love the book is because his the most elegant description of how people make change that I've really run across, and user friendly. And the chapter that speaks to me is the middle one. Is 3 essential sections based on his idea of how change happens. First section is something is ending. Third section, something is yet to begin. Middle section he calls the neutral zone. And this is the one everybody hates, and myself included many times, because it's the I don't know. It's the you're in between one trapeze bar and the next, and most people want to fix. They want the next job, the next relationship, the next thing. And he makes a beautiful case for how important it is to submit ourselves to the neutral zone and really use it to catapult us forward. And that's why I love that book, is because of that middle section.
So what's going to be next on the fire after Signs?
Being on the road with it, taking it down off the shelf and opening it up in front of real people in real time, and offering the material to people, all over the place, as far and wide as I possibly can. That's what's really on the front burners for me right now. I spent 10 years in a room with this,
wow.
And it's interesting that in the 6 months before I hit the road, I developed a textbook case of restless leg syndrome. I've never had this in my life. And I looked it up. It was exactly the symptoms I was experiencing. And they stopped to the day that I hit the road.
Oh, that's interesting.
This is one of the questions that I actually ask people in some of my workshops, is to look at where you're restless and to ask the question, what wants to move? Where does it want to take you? And it's just an interesting symptom, because I was clearly ready to roll. And, the timing wasn't right. But during that period of time, I felt incredible restlessness that stopped the minute I hit the road.
I like that.
Interesting.
That's another one of those little nudges you get.
Absolutely.
So you paid attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and that's why you're on the road with the tour for centers like this. And
right.
I'm looking forward to the workshop tonight.
Great.
And if there's anything else that you would want to add, anything you want us to know, this interview is for the Science of Mind magazine readers and who else tunes in on the internet. Is there something, if you wanted to leave them with something today, what would it be?
Boy. It's just one of the rock bottom feelings I have and have had about the whole project, and take with me on the road, is just this sense or this belief that life is so rich. It's so remarkably, amazingly rich. And we often settle, myself included, for so little. And it's like the notion of a hungry ghost. You've heard this Buddhist notion of the hungry ghost? A huge stomach and a little tiny mouth. We have these enormous hungers and appetites and desires and passions and gifts and talents. And we just settle for so little. I think of a young fellow that I met in San Francisco a couple of years ago, who told me that his whole life he'd wanted to be a public speaker. But he'd spent so much time, years and years and years, biting my tongue, is the way he put it, that when I was talking to him, I noticed he actually had a really pronounced scar on the tip of his tongue where he had bitten it repeatedly. And I see so many tactics that people have, and again, myself included, to hold us, to bite our tongues, in the metaphorical sense, to bite our tongues and hold back our voice and our visions and our energies and our juices. And it just seems a good old Greek tragedy to me, So my heart and soul are in that place of acknowledging that we often settle for so less and life is so rich. And I would love to do my modest part to correct that flaw.
Well, I'm here to say that you do, and you have for me, and I know that you will for the readers and people who tune in. And I want to thank you for coming to Chico to do the workshop and taking the time to do the interview with me. So
you are so welcome.
Thank you.
All right.